to the bank. But me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. I, of course, am your commander-in-chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Quickly wanted to give you guys an update. More visits for the Washington Commanders as we feverishly race towards the NFL draft here in 2023. We are just a shade over a week. Thursday at 8 p.m. the draft will commence, day number 1, and I cannot wait. Bart Scott can't wait. Washington had another 3 players added to their official visits list. We'll go over those 3 players quickly. I wanted to start today's show, however, by giving you a little insight. A little birdie chirped in my ear, told me that the team is very interested. Obviously, we've talked about this. We know they're interested in adding a quarterback at some point in this draft. We don't know if it's going to be early. I surmise that it won't be early. I think they're doing their due diligence. In the event and Hendon Hooker somehow slips to the 2nd round and they're sitting there at 47, I think they would not hesitate to pull the trigger. I don't think he will be around at 47. I've already made it abundantly clear that I expect Hendon Hooker to be a 1st-round pick. I do not expect Washington to pull the trigger on him at 16. Maybe in a trade back scenario where they move back out of 16 and maybe move to, say, 24 or 27. Maybe they still feel comfortable there. Maybe they pull the trigger on Hendon Hooker at that time. I doubt it. I don't see them pulling the trigger on a 1st-round quarterback, nor a 2nd-round quarterback for that matter, not named Hendon Hooker, and I don't think Hooker's going to be there, but they've done their due diligence nonetheless. I've already stated that they look to add a quarterback at some point in this draft, and we all kind of feel that same way. I don't know if everyone's buying into that narrative or not, but that's the narrative that I'm pushing, is that I expect them to add a signal caller at some point during this year's draft, preferably day 3, and that's what I think they're ultimately going to do. I did that in my mock draft. I was a bit biased when I did it, but the guy that I've heard, the little birdie chirping in my ear, has told me that the team is very interested in DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the UCLA quarterback. This is a guy that got a ton of starting experience at the collegiate level, played under Chip Kelly, the Chipster, the last 3 years, I believe, of his career. Has gotten better as a passer throughout his career. We'll turn it over a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think they like his size. He's not a big guy, but he's 6'2", in today's NFL, 6'2" is about average height for a quarterback. He's got a solid arm. It's good enough. It's functional enough to get the football wherever it needs to go, but he's a tremendous athlete. And I think that's the thing that they're very, very intrigued by, is his athleticism coupled with the ability to throw the football and his growth as a quarterback over time. I think they see him as a guy that they could potentially develop into a quality backup quarterback. And so just be on the lookout for DTR. I wanted to draft him in my mock draft, but at the time of the selection where I spent a pick on the quarterback, he was not available in the 6th round, which is when I pulled the trigger on Jaren Hall. So I think that's a guy that they're very, very interested in. They had a Zoom meeting with him, and they don't have many Zoom meetings with players. I think a Zoom meeting is a way to really show interest in a player without having it get out to the masses. If you have an official 30 visit with a player, everyone's going to know about it. It's going to be all over social media. And so the easiest way to sneak under the radar, show that you're interested in a guy, kind of get to know a player. You can talk ball with him on a Zoom meeting. You can kind of get to know him, kind of get a feel for him. Obviously, Rivera has said he really likes to meet people in person, as do I. I get that. I understand that there was a lot of these Zoom meetings during COVID. And so now that you're back to a level of normalcy, you'd like to have an opportunity to meet guys in person. But if you don't want to hint off to other teams exactly what direction you may or may not be going in, you kind of try to keep your thing, under wraps. You try to keep your movement as low key as possible. And to me, a Zoom meeting is a step right below an official 30 visit, which they didn't have DTR in for one of them, but they did have a Zoom, and they have not had Zoom meetings with very many players. So keep that in mind as we go into day 3 of the draft. If they still have not selected a quarterback at that current time, be on the lookout for a guy like DTR. I think they're very interested and intrigued by DTR, and we'll see if anything happens there. That said, 3 more players added to the list of official visits. 2 more offensive linemen, 1 a guard, Braden Daniels out of Utah. This is more of a day 3 prospect. He's a Ron Rivera special. Why? Because this is a guy that has played both left and right tackle, also played guard, has double-digit starts at each position. So he's got double-digit starts at left tackle, double-digit starts at right tackle, double-digit starts at guard. So just off the strength of that, you know Ron Rivera is licking his chops, loves the positional flex and what this guy could potentially bring for an offensive line where you're looking for diversity. You're looking for a guy that can help you, take away a roster spot on game day. Braden Daniels is that type of player because he can play multiple positions. But make no mistake about it, he is more suited, more likely than not. Okay, I can't say this with 100% certainty, but from what I've seen, he probably more so translates to guard at the next level than he does tackle. But in a pinch, and this is what you love to see, in a pinch, if I have to and I got to move some pieces around, he can play tackle if need be. So that's a guy you look for in day number 3. Don't think you would be looking to spend a day 1 or 2 pick on a Braden Daniels out of Utah. But again, I think that's a guy that they are interested in, obviously, doing their due diligence. Again, you don't know how the draft is going to shake out. You don't know what positions they're going to attack in the first, second, or third round. We've been programmed, and we do this every year. We did it last year where we got fixated on Chris Olave. So when we traded back and we didn't get Olave, and some of you got fixated on the Notre Dame safety, and so we do this thing where we get fixated on a player or a specific scenario where certain things happen, and when they don't happen, we start getting upset. And last year was a great example of that. We got fixated on Chris Olave. Well, they traded back and allowed the Saints to come up and get Chris Olave, and then we got Jahan Dotson, and a lot of you lost your damn minds because that's not the scenario we've been discussing the entire time. Most of the time, we've been discussing 2 scenarios. Either they take an offensive lineman in the first round or they take a corner. All right. And then the other scenario is to trade out. And then you take the offensive lineman or the cornerback, right? That's been the scenario, though. It's somehow always been an offensive lineman or a corner. For some of you, you've gotten frisky, tight end, running back has been thrown into the mix. You've convinced yourself, hey, what if Bijan Robinson? No, it's not going to happen. He may not even be there, but even if he is, it's not going to happen. I've told you that it's more likely that if Washington is going to spend a pick on a non-corner or offensive lineman at 16, it's more likely to be an edge rusher. Keep in mind, they know that the likelihood is they'll only be able to keep one of the 2 premier pass rushers that they've drafted over the last 4 years. It's either going to be Montez Sweat or it's going to be Chase Young. They probably aren't going to be able to keep both of them. And in knowing that, if a guy falls into your lap, and this is what I've been preaching since the beginning of this process, if a player that you really like, and I've said Myles Murphy, that's the guy that I've circled, and we're going to talk about him here in a second. If you really like one of these edge rushers and they fall into your lap at 16, this is why you put yourself in a position to draft best player available, because you want to be able to say, hey, Myles Murphy isn't a guy that we necessarily need. However, we're planning for the future. He will play this year, and he'll play a great deal of snaps. We know that injuries happen in this league. We know that guys get tired and you have a rotation. And so it's not like you're drafting Myles Murphy and he's not going to see the field like he's a backup tackle or something. He's a backup defensive end now, but you're grooming him to step into that starter's role next year more likely than not if Sweat's not back, or if Chase Young is a guy that you ultimately look to deal, right? Or something along those lines. Whatever takes place, you're probably not going to have both Chase Young and Montez Sweat 2 years from now, is essentially what I'm saying to you. So at the end of the day, why not prepare yourself now? If you get an opportunity, Myles Murphy is sitting there, why not take him? And hence, Myles Murphy is now on the list for a top 30 visit with the Commanders. It makes a ton of sense to me. It's the first time we've had a first round type of edge rusher brought in for a 30 official visit. So that tells me that they're doing their due diligence. Again, it may mean nothing, okay? It could mean everything. It could mean nothing. But at the end of the day, they're doing their due diligence and making sure they dot all their I's, they cross all their T's at 16 to make sure that they're prepared in the event that anything happens, okay? Anything, because again, I keep talking about 5 quarterbacks going. What if 5 quarterbacks go? What if Hendon Hooker goes before? Because I've said that I think ultimately the destination for Hendon Hooker in the first round is the Minnesota Vikings. Well, they're back all the way at 24, right? 23, rather. Okay? What if Hendon Hooker goes to the Titans at 11? All right? And you get 5 quarterbacks going in the first 11 picks? What if that happens? You are guaranteed to have 1 or 2 players that have no business being around at 16 be there. Now, that could also enhance the value of the pick, and Washington could see that and decide to get out of there. Or they could say, oh my God, look at what just fell in our lap, i.e. a Myles Murphy. Now, again, Myles Murphy, for some of you, doesn't tickle your fancy. For others, what I'll tell you, and I'm going to have some videos coming out in the coming days and in the next week or so before the draft, because we're going to really go into the draft heavy to prepare you for Thursday, Friday, into Saturday. But one of the things in this particular draft, more so than recent drafts with edge rushers, is that you have to be able to project. This is not a draft where, that's why Will Anderson is so far above everyone else, is because you've seen enough. There's enough empirical evidence. There's enough production that you can say he translates to the next level. Whereas a lot of these guys, you have to project. The numbers aren't there. There's not enough consistency. What they were asked to do in college is probably not what they're going to be asked to do at the pro level. And so you've got to figure out, does this guy fit what I'm looking to do? There's not a lot of production with Tyree Wilson. There's not a lot of production with Myles Murphy. There's no production really at all with Lucas Van Ness. But you have to be able to look at those guys and project, what will this guy be at the next level based off of the traits that he has. And so I think you look at Myles Murphy, he needs a lot of work. Technically, he has absolutely no rush plan, but it's what they asked him to do at Clemson. A lot of read option he played against, and, a lot of times he had to be outside contained. It's the same thing when you were evaluating Montez Sweat. There wasn't a lot there. Sweat wasn't spin moving and doing, and again, you've seen that at the pro level. Sweat doesn't have a package of moves. He doesn't have a ton of things that he can, tap into to get to the quarterback. They need to be developed more. And if you're more on the side of, hey, we don't have the best defensive line coach, we got a new coach. And I'd like to see if, you get your hands on a talent like a Myles Murphy, maybe you're able to develop him a little bit better now that you don't have Sam Mills III there. But I digress. Myles Murphy being on this list is important because they haven't had a first-round grade edge rusher in for a visit to this point. This is the first one. And so what that tells me is that they're doing their due diligence. They're putting themselves in a position mentally to adjust to whatever happens. And if a Myles Murphy is the best option on the board at 16 for them, all right, and they can't get out, maybe he's the selection. And I've said all along, that's the route I would go. If I'm not going offensive lineman, if I'm not going corner at 16, the first position, non-corner or offensive line that I'm considering is edge rusher, just because of what I know is looming around the corner for the Commanders in terms of a decision that has to be made with those 2 edge rushers. So I'm not surprised to see Myles Murphy. I'm actually shocked that it took this long for them to engage a potential first-round edge rusher, but Myles Murphy is the first on that list. So also, Anton Harrison wraps up the 3 guys that have been added to the list. A lot of people, I've talked to a lot of Washington fans who have thrown his name out as a guy that they really like out of Oklahoma. He's more of a day 2 pick to me. I think he'll be gone anywhere between the 2nd round and the 3rd. I don't think he makes it to day number 3. And so he's a guy with really good length for the position of tackle. He's a tackle, a guy that has started on both sides of the line, but primarily he's a left tackle. And so this is a guy that has good length for the position, 34-inch arms, which when you're 6'4", generally 34-inch arms aren't attached to 6'4" frame. Normally that's a 6'6" guy, right? So he's got really good length for the position. He's a solid athlete, not a great one, but he's more than functional enough to get the job done. I think he has some technical things that he has to work out. It's not usually pretty with Anton Harrison. I'm just going to be blunt and frank with you. It's usually not pretty with him. But again, I've talked about this before. You get 2 grades when you're in the NFL. All right, you get 2 grades. One is, did you do your job? And then 2 is, technique-wise, did you do it the right way? Okay. And for Anton Harrison, a lot of times, it's a B plus in the did he do his job. In the aesthetics, the technique-wise, did you do it the right way? Did you do it the way we coached you to do it? That's C minus, D plus area, right? It's not always the prettiest, but again, effectiveness is what most people care about the most, because it doesn't always have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be aesthetically pleasing. It just has to work. And it does for Anton Harrison a lot of the time. So he's a guy that, solid athlete, good length, solid movement skills. I don't think he's a man mover in the run game. He would, to me, he represents what we've been on the offensive line. He represents what we've been, kind of more of a finesse offensive line. We get in the way. We don't necessarily move you out of the way. We just get in the way, right? That's what our offensive line has been. You know, sans for guys like Brandon Sheriff, and when we had Trent Williams, like Morgan Moses wasn't a man mover. He was, hey, I'm going to get in your way. And now you can't get to my running back, you know. That's what we've been. Chase Roulier isn't a man mover. He's a, hey, I'm going to get in the way. I'm going to wall you off. My guy's got a little crease here. That's what we've been as an offensive line. Anton Harrison, for me, is more of that. All right. If you're looking to go in a different direction, then you need to get a guy that is a little bit more physically imposing and physical at the point of attack. I don't think that's what he is. But again, he does his job. And so he's from the DC area. Not that that matters, but he's from the DMV area. And so I know a lot of people are talking about, you know, potentially bringing him home. But he's another guy that Washington showed interest in. It makes a ton of sense, because what if you go edge rusher in round 1? What if you go corner in round 2? You haven't touched the offensive line. Anton Harrison is a guy that'll be there more likely than not in the 3rd round when you select. That would probably be the time you would look to pull the trigger on a guy like Anton Harrison. So it makes a ton of sense. Again, Washington weighing all options. We don't know how this thing is going to go. All right. They can go in. It could go in so many different directions. We could get a surprise dropped on our head on draft night. You know, they could go quarterback in the 1st round and pick Hendon Hooker. I don't think it's happening, but hey, all bets are off. All right. Washington has put themselves in a position where they don't have to do anything they don't want to do. And that's where you want to be heading into the draft, specifically where we are drafting. When you're in the middle, smack dab in the middle of the 1st round, you want to be able to say, hey, whatever comes our way, we want to be prepared, and we'll take whatever we feel like is the best player at, you know, our pick. You don't want to be pigeonholed into, hey, we really have to get one of these, which is why they made the moves they made in free agency, put themselves in a position to explore all options. And I feel like that's what they're doing throughout this process. Doesn't mean that they're not honing in. Again, we added 3 more prospects. 2 of them are offensive linemen. So you see the trend here, okay? You see the trend here. Of all the positions, the top 30 visits have been dominated by the offensive line. Dominated by the offensive line. Now, I think this makes 4 tackles, 4 guards, and 3 centers. That's 11 players out of 23 that they've interviewed to this point, or at least have on the list. Hendon Hooker, if I'm not mistaken, was today, and he's been on the list. So some of these guys they haven't talked to yet, but they're on the list. Out of 23 players, 11 of them, so pretty much half, just a shade under half, are offensive linemen. So you see where they're going. If nothing else, we're coming away, and I think, and I've said this already, we're coming away with at least 2 offensive linemen. Now, whether it's a tackle and a guard and a center, or a tackle and a center, I don't know what's going to be the breakdown, but I still think, even though I'm starting to be swayed a bit because of how many tackles they've talked to, I still believe it's 2 interior offensive linemen. I still think it's a center and a guard that we ultimately come away with. No tackle. But they've talked to so many tackles, and they've done so much work on the tackle position. If one falls in their lap that they really, truly feel like is a great fit, I could see them going tackle guard. I think they know that a lot of guys can be taught to play center, and even center's an important position. And I don't like to lowball the center position, and I don't like cutting corners at center. But they know worst comes to worst, push comes to shove. You can teach one of these guys to play center. So at the end of the day, I think they're ultimately going to take 2 offensive linemen. I still think it's going to be a center and a guard, but I would not be surprised if it's a tackle. Hey, they could go 3 and take one of each, a tackle, a guard, and a center. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Highly unlikely because you've got so many other positions that I feel like you need to at least add a player at. And there's still the free agent, the undrafted free agent pool where you don't draft a tackle. You talk to all these guys throughout the process. You reach out, make contact, and you sign a guy as soon as the draft is over. That's also a possibility. They could do that at center and take a guard and a tackle and not draft center and reach out into that pool of players and grab a center. But to me, center is the one of the few positions where I'm like, hey, no matter what, because you cannot go into the season relying on Chase Rouillier's health if he's on this roster. We still think, not we, some of us, all right, I don't know what to think at this point, but I think he's going to be here ultimately. Because if you're going to cut him, why haven't you done it already? If he's a June 1 cut, if he's a post-June 1 cap casualty, why haven't we already been notified of that? Maybe you don't have to do that right now. Nobody else is, designated someone for post-June 1 cut. So why do you have to divulge that information if nobody else is doing it? Maybe that's where they are with that process, but I don't think Chase Rouillier is going anywhere. I think at worst case scenario, it's going to be a restructure for him, if anything. But which Mark Mayhew has said, we really don't like restructuring deals. Either you're here or you're not. We like cash to cap. That's what he said. So again, I think Chase Rouillier is going to be here. But because of his health or lack thereof and his situation the last 2 years, to me, you have to do something at center. You cannot go into this season with Nick Gates as your primary starter or backup and not have anything else there, because with what we've dealt with the last 2 years, the likelihood is you're going to need at least 3 centers. 3 centers. And one of them can't be a guy that's been injured for the last 2 seasons, essentially. So, and Nick Gates, if to be honest, he's coming off of a massive injury, even though he played in 9 games last year. So we feel good about where he is. He came off of a major injury. We need to get a center in here. So I think center is going to be one of the positions that they draft. But anyway, I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on the Command Post. 3 more top 30 official visits added to the list, brings the total to 23. Washington is charging towards the draft next week. And I feel like we're in a good spot. We're in a really good spot to take advantage of whatever happens at 16, whether you only get 3 quarterbacks that go in the top, 16 picks or 15 picks before we get on the clock. You get 4 or you get 5, and there's a bit of spillage. Whatever happens, I think they'll be prepared this year, more so than in the past, where I wasn't quite sure. Last year, I felt good about 11 because I said they're going to get out of 11. They were hell-bent on doing it, and they did it. And right now, as it stands, that's a franchise-altering draft at this current juncture. Now, 2 years from now, we'll look back on that trade, and the only guy that we really netted anything from out of that trade could be Jahan Dotson. But if this thing continues in the direction that it's heading, and it's Dottie, it's B-Rob, and then it turns out to get you a quarterback, something that we've been after for quite some time, and Sam Howell, you've got to then say that is one of the all-time trades in franchise history. I don't think anything trumps the trade of, essentially fleecing the New Orleans Saints and having them trade all of their picks essentially for just the ability to go up and get Ricky Williams. I really still don't know how the hell we managed to do that with them. But outside of that trade, that the trade last year might be the biggest trade in franchise history if things go the way that I hope they go. But again, we'll see. Anyway, I digress. You guys get out of here. I will see you guys more likely than not on Thursday night for the Command Post Live. If not before then definitely Thursday night. But in any event, You guys enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you guys on Thursday for the Command Post Live. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. You guys have a good one.